to the, went too fast, sorry. Thanks everyone, welcome to the ops section group conversation. This covers the ops stages of our product. The kind of combined team who provides this update is engineering, product, and we started adding UX this time. So I will do my brief overview. I added kind of like the highlights, highlight slide right out of the top. There's a little Easter egg in the first slide about today's first day of the quarter, and I didn't want to forget to mention that a great job by our sales organization. On the highlights page, so starting to see a lot of community contributions in this section, which is awesome, especially given that I think we still have some adjustments needed in our pricing model to bring some stuff down to core so that we can encourage even more community contributions. So that's awesome to start seeing those. We're close to fully staffed. I'll say personally, that's really awesome for me. We don't have any product managers in interim roles, including myself. And I know on the engineering side, we're starting to have fully staffed teams able to deliver at a higher rate as a result. We had done some direction updates previous, especially the ops direction update previous to the last group conversation. But since then, we've also been putting some effort into increasing our monitor vision and increasing the ambition there. And then I also recorded a kind of walkthrough where we walked through and had a Q&A with the team of the ops section vision. So that's on the ops section page now. Accomplishments, the incident management going to viable. We've had a lot of improvements in incident management since it went minimal in, I think, May. It's slated to go viable at the 12.5 release, so at the release this month. But there's been a lot of improvements just along the way. Those are the kind of like last portions when I'm excited about that. As a user in my test projects of group level clusters, having the environments tab in when you're looking at a group level cluster is really great. You can kind of immediately get a sense for like the number of pods deployed and the different applications that are using that cluster. That's really cool. We added Jaeger to the UI. This has been a thing that I know Sid was particularly pointed about. We'd had our like tracing NBC was basically just linking out with a URL to Jaeger. We've now embedded that in the UI, and I think that will give us some improved feedback into how people are using tracing and maybe what specific components they would want to see in directly in the UI, kind of like natively in the UI in the future. I'm really excited about source control dashboards and this intersection between our roots as a source control management company that is applying many of those same principles to operations and observability, which is really cool. Things on the roadmap that I'm excited about, dogfooding metrics on GitLab is something that I know Dove has been heavily engaged with Marin and some other members of the infrastructure team. Moving error tracking to viable. So we integrate with Sentry and we're bringing some more native UIs to the user experience for reviewing and digging into your errors directly in the GitLab application. Two things related to AWS, like we have kind of what you would call a Google preference today, for lack of a better word, where you can create clusters that are, you can like natively create Kubernetes clusters on GKE, but not EKS, and we have this native preference in serverless for Knative, but adding AWS Lambda in serverless and EKS cluster creation on Kubernetes management. I'm excited about those. And then lastly, Elasticsearch as a managed app. So our current logging capabilities are really minimal, and by adding Elasticsearch as a managed app, we'll be able to kind of increase those pretty rapidly. So those are my highlights. I will open it up to questions. And Sid, you had the first one.
Thanks. And Sasha, you have a mic. What caused the EKS cluster creation to slip? And I absolutely want to make it super clear, this product is not responsible for slippage, it's engineering. But I'm still curious what happened and whether there's a perspective on that.
Yeah, no, it's still ongoing, Daniel. I don't know if you have any immediate thoughts, or I don't know if the engineering team members, Enrique, I think, is finishing it up right now. I don't know if he's on the call.
I can speak to that somewhat, Kenny and Sid. So at the moment, I'm the interim EM for the configure orchestration team. So I have seen at least the last sort of month of that process. And the part of what caused it to slip is there was an assumption that the way integrating with EKS, the way that we would integrate with EKS would be very similar to GKE. And, it turned out once we got into it and got started that there were not as many similarities as we thought, and that ended up being more complex and more work. So that is definitely something that we are retrospecting, and we want to make sure that we suss out these issues before we get too far, into implementation, or really before we start implementation.
Cool, thanks for that. Slide 28, it's cool to see the community contributions to Monitor. Actually, it's happening earlier than I thought. Like, I thought we would have to dog food ourselves before anybody else would use it. So that's great news. Any idea who's adopting, what's the rate, what are the use cases, anything, any context on are people actually using it and contributing because of that, or what's happening? Why are we getting these awesome contributions?
Sarah, I don't know if you want to add some color, feel free to after I do. I will say that it wasn't until I saw these slides, and I'm not honestly sure which engineering team member compiled the slides, that I realized that they were, I normally did not expect to see these contributions. So I have not dug in, but I agree it's super interesting to me because A, a lot of this is not in core, and B, a lot of this is stuff that we're not even using ourselves. So I am really interested in understanding who's contributing.
Cool. Should there be more in core?
Yes. Sarah and Dove have a couple of issues to move stuff down to core.
Looking forward to those. I think that makes sense to, in the beginning, put everything in core until we get some usage, and then the executive functionality is different. My fourth question, how do we see AWS Lambda versus our existing serverless solution? So we have a serverless solution. You can deploy it. You can deploy it to AWS as well. Now, AWS Lambda is super popular, but how do we think about supporting both, and possibly supporting, I think every big cloud now has a variant? Are we going to support 5 of those, and then plus our own cloud independent serverless solution based on Knative? How do you think about that?
Yeah, the PM, unfortunately, for that group is not available on this call, so I'm going to speak, but I don't want to speak out of turn from Victor. I think of it as we've been hearing a lot of demand since we had our initial serverless launch for the same kind of native primitives for Lambda, that we were having users who were wanting to deploy more natively to Lambda. So I guess you could think of it as in two ways. One is our Knative based solution is enabling the quick ability to get started with serverless if you're not doing anything. But we are hearing from people that were saying, well, we are already starting with Knative, and we're already starting with serverless on Lambda, and we just want easy primitives in our deployment and management of those functions, typically natively to GitLab. I think you're also making me think through, though, as we add EKS, well, I don't know if we'll be able to install. I don't know if you're able to install Knative on an EKS cluster. So that would also be a question of maybe that's our default. And the reason why we're getting a lot of can I do it with Lambda was because we didn't have any great native support for AWS workloads.
Well,
and I think EKS.
Sid, we also, Kenny recently got together and started creating a vision for the configure stage. So that discussion of how we move forward with support for other platforms is also sort of ongoing right now. There's a lot of contribution from Nicholas, for example, and the other team members in product to come up with a really good vision for the configure side to match what we have for Monitor. And that's certainly been a topic of conversation. So you can probably expect to see more on this coming up pretty shortly.
Cool. Yeah, I looked at the Epic, I linked 1727, and it didn't talk at all about hey, we already have a serverless solution. This is how the two will coexist. So I think that's a big question to solve. We should listen to customers, but yeah, it's obvious to me that Lambda has a lot more usage, so that's what people ask for. But we should be very careful of what direction we advise people take.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to end up with two half solutions.
Right. That's a great point. Cool. I'll follow up with that.
Well, the Senti one is scheduled to be a managed app, so are we going to do one for Jaeger?
Yeah, and again, Dove's not on the call, but we were talking about having doing some product discovery around tracing to see. I think there's some questions about is Jaeger the appropriate path forward? Do we need something a little bit more native to GitLab? If we install it as a managed app, how can we, like the APIs for Jaeger are not great, so in Sentry we can kind of more easily build the primitives in, but in Jaeger we can't. So I know Dove has been looking into creating the viable plan for tracing and is going to be doing some product discovery.
That makes a lot of sense. We want everything in a single interface. So if the API isn't great, that's a big drawback.
Right. Yeah, I would say it's interesting when you think about in the ops section in general. We have both primitives where we've started with, oh, you can install a managed app, and then added but you can also bring your own. Prometheus is an example of that. And we've also had the reverse in Sentry where it's like, well, first you got to bring your own, and then the next one is managed app. And I don't know if Dove and I were discussing, is there a standard that we should follow in that process? I think it kind of is app dependent.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Don't coordinate a thing that doesn't need coordination. Every coordination has costs associated with it.
Cool. Thanks for the question, Sid. Anyone else?
I was going to write this down, but I'll just say it. I have a bug report in slide 7. I can do this every section meeting now. Auto DevOps is marked as viable today, but the plan was Q3 by 10/22. It was going to be, sorry, it's minimal today. It's supposed to be viable. I assume it's not, which is fine, but it just means you've got inconsistent data in categories.yaml.
Cool. I will check that. Thank you.
So I think it's the slide screenshot might not have been updated, but I think that the website reflects the right one, if I'm not mistaken. But thank you for that, Mark.
Well, let's dig into that, Daniel. There's the way that page is generated. I think it generates off plans, not off of. There's 2 fields on that YAML file.
Yeah, but he's right. The live one does show them both. It shows that it's minimal, not viable. So he's adjusted the plan.
Yeah, and so if I tried to go in and update the screenshots, I might have missed this one. That we use the same slide deck each time.
So while we're talking about that slide, what has changed on that slide since the last time you presented that slide?
Oh, well, I just said it might be the same one I presented before, so let me do this. I'm gonna look across my screen and see what was there before.
Like I'm just thinking, has anything been pushed out? You know,
yeah.
Q1 numbers, has anything been pulled in?
Runbooks was pushed out.
Okay.
Runbooks was slated to be viable in Q4 and is now in Q2.
Makes sense.
Daniel, I don't see any other ones. I'm just doing the quick scan.
Yeah, that's right. So for Auto DevOps, we just have a couple of dependencies on CI that have not shipped yet, but we have a big one that's going to take it to viable. And that is basically selectively being able to run jobs and pipelines. And so we're just waiting for that one, and that will enable us to run Auto DevOps only when certain requirements are met. And that is what's going to take us to viable there. So we're hoping that will happen this quarter.
Mark, I'll add this reference. We have a little like how we're prepping for the GC issue, and I'll add this to the retrospective that I'll make sure to have a kind of what's the delta between when we last presented this and when we did in terms of maturity plans.
That'd be great. I'd actually love to see that as a standard thing, including the GCs.
Well, Jason and I are using a standard GC prep template for these section-wide ones, so we can make that happen.
Love the presentation, by the way. Lots of detail, lots of links. It's really fun to read.
Jarv, you're next.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say I'm really excited for this feature. I think we can probably be your first customer because this is something we do now a lot with incidents. We already use issues for incidents, and we often find ourselves screenshotting Grafana panels into them. So I just kind of wanted to give you a heads up when this is ready. Of course, it's going to hit GitLab.com before the official release, so we would love to try it out.
Awesome, cool. Sarah, I see you nodding. Noted.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I'll get some time with you to chat about that.
Cool.
Mark, is that Mark P or a different Mark?
Yeah, same Mark, sorry. I should put my full name there. Yeah, I've asked you this before, but in case things have changed, how are we doing on the a couple cabs ago, we heard loud and clear that folks were using us with Kubernetes, but not using our Kubernetes integration for a variety of reasons. How are we doing on closing those gaps?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So I think that there are two main reasons why those are not being used. And the first one is that our integration has a very opinionated way of having namespace creation and resources and user accounts and things like that. So people want more control. So we already took a step towards that. And basically we give an ability to add a cluster and not have GitLab manage it. So you're going to be able to create all of the resources yourself. Internally, we do this with Terraform. So this allows you to do this already. So that was kind of the first step there. The second step there is that for people that do want to take advantage of the integration and they already have an existing practice and they want to use their own namespaces, we want to give them the ability to map their environments to existing namespaces and not the ones GitLab is going to give them. That's something that we're working on 12.5. And then finally, I think that the big thing is that the integration currently requires cluster admin privilege. And that's something that a lot of people are hesitant about giving an integration externally. So what we want to do is we want to have that be more flexible and allow users to say if they want this to be a cluster admin or scope to a single namespace. What that will mean, though, is that if they want to use features like GitLab managed apps, they will all be deployed into the namespace that they give us. And they will not be able to use cluster-wide resources like Knative, for example. But that's something that we have planned, and it's upcoming in the next couple of releases.
Cool, yeah, because if I remember correctly, one of the big things was that they had like teams of people that allocated namespaces. You'd request a namespace, and they would give you a quoted namespace, and then all your stuff had to be contained within that namespace. And if you wanted to install, Prometheus or something, we install it in a different place. It doesn't work. So as part of that, will people be able to install Prometheus in their own namespace and have multiple Prometheuses running on Promethei? I don't know what the plural of Prometheus is.
Yeah, so that's what we're envisioning. Is that's kind of the compromise. Is that you can have this more tight security that will do it in a single namespace. And that means if you want multiple people to make use of something like Prometheus, it will have to be like in multiple namespaces.
Yeah, well, in Prometheus normally runs really well that way anyway. I mean, in fact, that's a best practice is that you could have, everybody should have their own Prometheus and then maybe you aggregate or whatever, but so that totally is fine for Prometheus. But I haven't looked at all the rest of the managed apps to see whether that works. Like you said, serverless doesn't, or Knative specifically doesn't. But as long as a lot do, then people can get a lot done.
Yeah, and then the final thing that you kind of brought up is the self-service thing. So we have a lot of big, large customers that are doing self-service portals that are homemade. So let's say they log in and they say, hey, I need a namespace with these resources, and then they get back, credentials. So this is something that they can do in GitLab, right? If an operator provides a cluster at the instance level, then teams kind of are implicitly doing that today, but it's very homogeneous. So if they want something that's different, like more resources and stuff like that, that could be something that they do through GitLab as well, and that's something that we're looking at as well.
Great, I'm glad you're going to say that. That was actually going to be a follow-on question, because it seemed to me like everybody's doing this homegrown thing, and like, why don't we just provide them a nice way that they can get a quoted, isolated namespace with all their policies and everything else, and maybe they still have to manually approve it, or maybe not, whatever it is, but why don't we just make that all easier for everybody?
Yeah, I was envisioning, like, are they having people file ServiceNow tickets for Kubernetes namespaces, which seems like the biggest anti-pattern I've ever heard of.
But it's probably exactly what they're doing.
Probably what's happening, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, but one of our customers built a Jupyter-based app that allows users to self-service in Kubernetes, saying, capacity, namespace, what it looks like, and things like that. So yeah, we've seen homegrown things all over the place, and that clearly indicates an opportunity of something that we could do well, since we have all of this knowledge and all of this context of their apps.
Awesome. Is that a new category, or does that live under Kubernetes management? I think that's what kind of is.
That's a good question. I think that I think about it as part of Kubernetes management, but yeah, in itself, there's enough there to be its own category. So that's a good point. That's something to talk about.
Cool. Other questions? All right. I'll leave with my Easter egg that I couldn't help but include, that today is National Feed Your Pets Cooked Food Day, which was right up our alley with dog fooding. So if you have a pet, give them something nice today. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, thanks, Kenny. That's awesome. Thanks
Thanks,
everyone.
Kenny. Bye.